Thank you, Joe, for that, and I welcome everybody to be here today. Hope to find this interesting and enlightening. Just want to go over some of the things that we can really do with probiotics in the companion animal world and kind of where we've been and where we're going. So if we think about probiotics, I mean, obviously they've been around for since the beginning of time, but about a century ago, Eli Menchikoff theorized that we can modify our microbiome by using yogurt, which will help with inflammation and different things that goes on in the body. And again, he thought that was best done if we look at inhibiting putative bacteria, pathogens, in the colon with lactate producing bacteria. So let's move up about 100 years, and FAO, WHO redefined probiotics, kind of technically, as live microorganisms, which, when administered in adequate amounts, confer a health benefit on the host. And that stood for quite a while, for several years. But the International Scientific Association for Probiotics and Prebiotics came out and kind of redefined it just a little bit more to make it a little bit more clear and grammatically correct, being that live microorganisms that, comma, when administered in adequate amounts, comma, confer a health benefit on the host. Again, just a slight change, but does have an important distinction. In fact, that we do have to know that we have sufficient product to actually give us a benefit. In their consensus paper, they also came back and said, typically they're saying you're going to need at least 1 billion CFU per serving to be an effective dose. This imparts the general benefits for just general healthy gut microbiota. They also noted that non-specific claims relative to just general gut health could be made for various bifidobacterium and lactobacillus species. So the two common claims they indicated for probiotics in this paper really discussed that, okay, support a healthy digestive tract. That's been reinforced, by hundreds and thousands of studies, and this tends to be a less strain specific claim that could be made or can be talked about. Secondarily, they indicated looking at a healthy immune system. As we know, the majority of the immune system in our bodies, 60% plus or minus, really comes, is associated with our gut immune system. So these are also backed by studies, but they tend to be much more strain specific. So they also noted that there could be other benefits, again, reproductive benefits, oral health, dental, lungs, skin, gut, brain, among others that they talked. But these could be very, very strain and species specific, as well as these many cases, some of these bacteria or probiotics can give us multiple health promoting benefits within a single one. So it's not just a single one. I think we'll see that a little bit later as we go down. Some of the possible mechanisms we talk about looking as how we consider them is things that are widespread. So among all studied bacteria, again, we're looking at colonization of the microbiome of the gut to, again, hope general gut health effectiveness. We see more species specific, again, looking at various synthesis of various products, gut barrier, enzymatic activities. And then some things are very, very strain specific, even within a species, is whether it be production of specific bioactives that we may see that would bring. If we look at these mechanisms, a few of them. So, for example, among all bacteria species, they all exhibit the bifidobacterium shunt, which is the production of lactate and acetate. They also all have a mucus binding protein. If we look at lactobacillus, they all have a lactate process but again, it's not the same as in bifidobacterium, but they all have that. But then there are certain things that are specific among strains, like various different proteins expressions, binding those, GNA, vitamin production, enzyme production. So some of those are very specific. Some of them are could be very general. What is a probiotic? So we all know, it's obviously they have to be a live microbe. So probiotics are things that are live, they're well defined, so we know what they are. They have a demonstrated benefit, and we can eat them, uh, administer them in adequate amounts to get a response we're looking for, and they're safe. We often hear, well, if I can eat sauerkraut or fermented foods or kefir or everything else, those, while live bacteria, are not necessarily considered probiotics because they are undefined, maybe multiple species, and they may be dead or killed bacteria. So again, those are not that they're a negative, they're very positive, but again, it just doesn't fit the strict definition of what a probiotic is as far as being defined. Common bacteria that are probiotic types that we see in the marketplace. Again, we have live vegetative bacteria. Those would be things like lactobacillus species, or bifidobacteria, enterococcus, pediococcus, things like that. They're live products that we deal with. There's spore-forming bacteria, which are bacillus species. Again, and then yeast probiotic, which is Saccharomyces cerevisiae boulardii. Again, there's a lot of yeast products out there that would not be considered probiotic, but there are a few that are. So the difference is, again, the size is, bacteria are very small compared to the yeast. Reproductive is by cell division, yeast is by budding. We don't typically see a lot of yeast in the digestive tract. So there's a big difference as well. And then cell wall compositions are different. And typically bacteria are not resistant to antibiotics versus yeast, which are often suggested when you're taking antibiotics. Again, this is something we'll cover a little bit down the road as well. So if we look at the functional effects between the yeast and the bacteria, we have a luminal effect, which really has, potentially has antimicrobial activity, binding, barrier binding to the mucosa, communication, competition for other bacteria, and it gives us immunomodulatory effects. Whereas the yeast, not so much antimicrobial activity, but it does give us some some bindings of unwanted substances, other products. And again, primarily you get enhancement of overall gut structure, gut function, gap junctions, again, crosstalk, and again, also helps with immune modulation. An example that we might want to consider or think about is our synergistic things that we see between the different types of probiotics. So we talked about vegetative and spore forming and yeast. Well, this is an example of a synergy that we see between a vegetative probiotic blend of Lactobacillus rhamnosus, helveticus, and bifidolongum, which we see on the far right of the slide, with a mix of probiotic bacteria, of yeast boulardii alone, or a combination of those three blends with the boulardii. So again, we're looking at here is a E. coli challenge and looking at the weight loss. So in the control, again, we stayed where we wanted to, as we would expect. The placebo, we saw about 35 grams of weight loss. With the probiotic, we decreased that weight loss. So again, showing not quite as strong of an effect with it. But again, reducing our weight loss to about 25 grams. The boulardii also showed a nice response. Again, about a 25-gram loss. But when I combined the boulardii with the probiotics, we saw even a much less weight loss. So again, a nice synergy going on between the yeast and the vegetative probiotics. So what makes a good probiotic? Again, there's a lot of things that we kind of talked about previously, but again, is it identified properly? Is it there? Is it safe? does it actually contain live microorganisms, especially at the time of administration? Storage conditions can really have a big difference on that. How it's processed, how it's manufactured, have a big deal for come into that. Does it remain active? Does it make it through the stomach, into the intestinal tract, where it in the colon, to where it actually has its primary modes of action? And again, what do we know what's going on, and what are the benefit that it's going to bring to the ring? But again, you need to know your supplier. Just because a product is on the market doesn't necessarily mean it's a safe product. A study that just came out in Journal of Animal Science in March, they showed a number of products. They looked at a number of 22 different strains of Enterococcus faecium, but they noticed that 14 of those 22 strains were not even actually Enterococcus faecium, even though that's what they're sold at. And a number of the bulk of them actually carried genes encoding for resistance to medically important antibiotics. So that's very critical to realize, that know your supplier to make sure you're getting a product. Make sure you have a safety program in place. For example, do they do a full DNA mapping of the strain that you're looking at? Do they go through that and look at that gene map? Are there any antibiotic resistant genes in those? There are several databases that can run through to look for those. Are there mobile elements, plasmids, things that can move around and make things changes to change the DNA of that, get genetic drift? Do they do studies, in vivo, in vitro, to make sure that they're doing what we think they want them to be? As we look at probiotics and the potential markets we think about, the obvious ones that typically we think about is digestive health. That's where it all pretty much started, but we know it helps in overall digestion, well-being, a lot of different things that it's known to do. We also think a lot about immune support. As we talked about earlier, that's the bulk of our immune system is actually in our guts. Other things that, as we are learning more about probiotics, is coming to, other things that has our gut and our probiotic and our gut microflora and our microbiome have an effect on our, other things, inflammation, weight management, arthritis. As we learn more and more about these things, we see it. And other things which actually are very popular right now as we look into the marketplace, or especially things like mental health, anxiety, stress, especially in these last couple of years, people have to live with your dog or your cat having to live with you all the time because you're not at work, or maybe you're going back to work and now they're stressed out because they miss you. Oral health, skin health, all, endurance, a lot of different things are coming into play that we understand that probiotics have a very strong effect in supporting those roles. Some of the benefits we know, obviously, are the gastrointestinal, the immune, gut brain, skin and coat, oral health, others such as life stage, lung, heart. Some will go through a few examples that would be interesting, I think, that we see and that a lot of people are working on and have questions about. So if we think about just general overall GI well-being, is we know we have thousands and thousands of microbes in our gut. There's probably, as we know, we've all heard many times, there's actually more probably bacteria in our bodies than there are actually cells in our body. So, but unfortunately, weigh a lot more than the 2 or 3 kilos of bacteria in my gut and my body and on my skin and such. And everybody's kind of has a unique and individual microbiome. But again, the 3 roles that we really have with the microflora in the gut is digestion, protection, and then development of the digestive tract. So again, our gut's very large, a lot of things, lots of organs, the small intestine, large intestine, liver, pancreas. We all know those. It has a big effect on defense in terms of the lymphoid system that we're dealing with. And we also have the enteric nervous system. So there's a lot of things that go into that the nervous system has in common, and they communicate directly with the gut. So if we look at some of the things that we see, so typically we see a lot in humans and also very effective in dogs and cats, but a lot of products are used for antibiotic associated diarrhea. So again, often we have antibiotics, we have sickness, it knocks out all of our bacteria. It affects those different things. So we can come in there to see that those things have an effect. My son once had a C. diff infection, a Clostridium difficile infection. Again, they recommended very strong to use probiotics to help maintain overall gut health and things like that. So we see that quite a bit on different products. Again, often there's combinations. So for example, Lactobacillus rhamnosus, helveticus, they can come into play and have benefits. If we think about immunity, it's going to really help protect the gut surface from pathogens in their relocation, adhering to the enterocytes and such. Certain probiotics give us innate immune responses, just kind of general, and others are more adaptive to that higher level of protection. So we can see bifidobacteria specifically really help with the diversification of the microbiota. They also affect with the absorptive capacity and immune modulation, as do lactobacilli. And again, helping the cytokine responses, the inflammation responses that we see in there. So again, affecting various things, not only in the immune system, but also affecting the immune system's response to other parts of the body, such as the lungs, the respiratory tract. Study showing with the combination of bifidum, bifidobacterium, and lactobacillus helveticus show that we can actually have a difference on attenuating the genes that we're dealing with these products. So, for example, had a control with a pathogen, again looking at the helveticus by itself, looking at the bifidobifidum by itself, and the roselle by itself. But then this ProbioKit is the combination of those three gave us a very strong response to all of them, more than in pretty much any of them alone. We hear a lot about the gut-brain axis, and that's been talked about for many, many years. I was just looking at a paper this morning, and a review paper, and there's over 250 various papers, most of them coming out in the last several years, from the last 10, 15 years, that it's really become a really big deal. But the gut brain, our enteric nervous system, is often known as our second brain. I mean, we talk about gut instinct, or I feel it in my gut. Well, there's a lot to that, because our gut, our system, our emotions can really be driven a lot by the bacteria and what's happening there. So we've looked at a number of different studies that come back and show the benefits, and a specific combination of Lactobacillus helveticus R52 and Bifidolongum 175 have really good documentation, really good results over time, looking at a number of different situations. Some of those are showing that we can reduce the anxiety that's typically inherited in rats. For example, when I've overstressed a rat, they'll pass that on to their offspring. By feeding this combination, we see reduction in that. But again, what it really does, it reduces our depression type behavior. It helps preserve neuroplasticity. And again, a lot of different things that, again, helping the cortisol levels, and a lot of different reductions in inflammation and stresses that come into play. So again, a lot of opportunities in our supplements and our foods to help our pets with this. Skin and coat, again, this is also very big. Again, not only does it, topical opportunities, but also, from the gut to the skin. So we know there's, again, thousands of species that inhabit this, and we can play a role. But again, as we look about it, if I have a healthy gut, I'm going to have less immune responses, which is also going to affect the skin, whether it be allergies or as things like that. About 13% of the people right now also are taking a probiotic, to help them with their skin health. Some of the things that we do see in products that, combinations of Blardi, Bifido, the yeast, Bifidobifidum longum, again, helping with acne, uh, resiliency of the skin, different things that kind of come into play by helping that overall natural defenses in the gut barrier. Healthy aging, again, Lactobacillus reuteri, Lactoplantarum, and Bifido animalis, all again show that helping with the antioxidant properties to help give us a natural defense and barrier function that also play into healthy skin as we age. And for sensitive skin, Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG, Roselle 52, the Helveticus, or Helveticus 52 and rhamnosus, again, just help showing overall enhancements of nice skin that again helps preserve all those things. Oral health. So again, we know that bacteria in our mouth can help cause dental issues, but again, it's typically linked to certain bacterias that we find in there. If we can displace our microbiome in our mouth with more positive, again, it gives us. So what's really happening? They're going to compete for those adhesion sites, just like they would down the intestine. Um, Again, it's going to inhibit those growths. So again, it's going to minimize those bacteria that potentially can cause caries. So a combination of Lactobacillus helveticus 52, Rhamnosus 11, Bifidolongum 175, and Boulardii, again, show a really nice response in terms of reducing the negative bacteria of strep mutans. So again, reducing that level with the product, and also actually very almost as effective as a typical chlorhexidine chemical solution. So a little bit more natural solution that we get into, that we can play into. So again, we're looking at competitions with the microorganisms, metabolic activities. So for example, the Helveticus roselle has production of hydrogen peroxide, which again is a strong antioxidant, again, to help with reduction of things we don't want. And again, the immune challenges that we're dealing with. So I don't know if you noticed, like I said, some bacteria earlier have multiple roles. If we've seen so far, for example, our Roselle 150 or Helveticum 52 has played a role in almost everything we've talked about: gut, brain, oral health, skin. So again, those are some of those products that have multiple, bacteria, probiotics that have very wide range of activity. Yeast, which we often don't think of as a probiotic, it does have some various interesting modes of action, a little bit different than, say, some of the bacteria. And again, gives us three key areas of defense, which is intestinal microbial bacteria, nice balance, maintaining the balance there, epithelial defense, and then immune response. So we're seeing our first line of a defense is, again, what makes it unique to bacteria is it does consume oxygen. And why is that important? Well, a lot of our probiotics, especially bifidos, tend to be fairly strict anaerobes. And so I'm making a better environment for my natural probiotics with the use of yeast. Attaches to and neutralization of other products. So, cell wall type of yeast will attach to various things to bind them so they become less problematic in the gut. Secondly, again, it been shown often to enhance tight junctions, to reduce that translocation of negative bacteria into the gut, and a better quality, better overall structure of the gut for absorption. And the third line is immune defense. So again, we will see enhances the IgA levels, increase red and white blood cells, and then a nice helping balance our cytokine responses to things. It wasn't long ago that it was kind of difficult sometimes to explain the cytokine response, but with COVID we've come out, we've all probably heard of the cytokine storm that often hits very early and causes a lot of issues with COVID. Yeast products and Boulardii will reduce the pro-inflammatory cytokines, so our body does not overreact to a challenge, which it often tends to do. So it gives us a more balanced response. And again, it doesn't overreact, and again, don't have some of those really negative responses that we often see when we first get sick. Maybe not quite as high a temperature, a little faster recovery. And again, this was shown in some pig studies, again, using Boulardii. So again, we see, just shortly after a challenge, we have this very high response to the challenge, but with the Boulardii, that's kind of not quite as strict. Again, our body is able to work a little bit more efficient. Some results we have seen in feeding Boulardii. Again, we have seen enhancements in the number of lactobacilli. Again, slight enhancements in reduction of odors and fecal scores. So again, a lot of nice things that we're seeing with Boulardii. Again, often in combination with other probiotics. We talked about antibiotic-associated diarrhea. This was a study done in Turkey several years ago. But again, feeding antibiotics at the same, by themselves, it led to a longer duration of diarrhea. When the Boulardii was started at the termination of the antibiotic, it reduced the diarrhea about half, from about 6 days to 3 days. So again, reduction. And when actually fed at the same time as the antibiotic, there was no diarrhea. So again, kind of confirming all the studies we've seen in other species as well. Other life stages we can think about. So for example, in juveniles and young animals and puppies and kittens, bifidobacterium is really critical to initiate the maturation of the gut and everything else. And we see that after even just 8 weeks, bifidobifidum and brevi are decreased naturally in those. But again, if I'm feeding those, giving those, supplementing your pet with those products, I can help maintain that and maintain that healthy gut. We think about seniors, for example, but we do know that over time that our bifidobacteria, as we age, are reduced as well. So again, it helps support in the senior, probiotics help support a healthy gut for superior functions, immune function, gut function, mental health, and such. So things you want to consider when you're working with somebody to do your probiotics is make sure you have the correct dose. I mean, you need enough delivered to the animal, to your dog, to your cat, to make sure that your horse, to make sure they're getting actually a benefit that is enough that it's there. But more is not always better. I mean, we've all seen these massive ones out there of, super high levels of CFUs. That isn't necessarily better. It may be more costly, but it may not really even give you an effect. And again, there's the potential, because even probiotics are not self, that it may have some others. What are your shelf life requirements? Pick your strains, pick your dosage to be able to meet those requirements. Strains vary in their stability. So some are quite stable, some degrade fairly rapidly. So what you would actually be formulating for at what time frame? Is it a year, 12 months? Is it 18 months? So again, it's going to vary how much overage you may need. What are your processing parameters? Probiotics in general don't like heat, especially live probiotics. They're quite unstable. It's one benefit to the spore former bacteria is they tend to be more stable to heat and things. So again, the consideration, if you are not able to work with a low temperature with the vegetative bacteria, there is options. What kind of packaging are you using? Obviously, the more airtight, watertight, heat resistant I have, the better stability I'm going to bring into the product. Is it going to be in a food? Is it going to be a powder? Is it going to be in a treat? How is it going to be there? So again, those things are going to kind of come into play. And you also got to think about the regulatory environments, because not all of them are approved for various different, in different countries, different uses. So again, all those things need to come into play. Just want to let you know that at Lallemand, we're here to help you develop your products and help guide you to the concerns that you're looking for and the life stages, the situations mental anxiety, immune health, digestive health, all those type of things that will come into play for you. And with that, we'd appreciate take any questions you might have. Thank you very much.